Russia has done something that could turn the course of the war in an unexpected direction. A massive provocation has been carried out, which has alarmed the military and politicians of Poland, the European Union, and even the United States. Now we will figure out what happened, what caused the incident, and most importantly, we will finish with an analysis of what might happen next. As a result of the violation of NATO airspace, by the Russian Air Force, possibly with the involvement of Belarus and China. But to get to that point, we need to figure things out. So drones flew into Poland from the territory of Belarus. They first said 19, now it's 22 or 23, so it's about 24 drones. Drones have already flown in before, and honestly, so have missiles, but from the territory of Ukraine. And you could assume or explain it as an accident. Drones that flew in as a whole group and without weapons couldn't have been heading to the front and couldn't have flown in by accident. In the same way, it's hard to assume that an officer, when giving the flight coordinates for these drones, gave the operators coordinates in Poland. That is really not in the direction of Ukraine at all. So why send drones to Ukraine that aren't equipped with weapons? So obviously it wasn't for Ukraine or the front lines. Let's say there's a 99% chance that the drones were launched on the orders of Russian military personnel stationed in Belarus for what they call joint exercises. Russia officially denies planning attacks on Poland, but neither the Russian nor the Belarusian Ministry of Defense has provided any explanation as to how these drones ended up over Poland. The Belarusians, however, said that the drones got lost. They were wandering through the forest picking mushrooms and got lost, and they lost control during attacks on Ukrainian targets. I've already explained why that's nonsense, right? Poland and Belarus exchanged information about these incoming objects flying toward Polish territory, and supposedly Belarus claims it shot down several stray drones. So what was it, and more importantly, why?
This morning, Poland is on high alert after drones from a wave of Russian attacks in neighboring Ukraine reportedly crossed the border. All Polish and NATO air defense systems were activated to destroy the drones. People in 3 Polish regions near the Ukrainian border are advised to stay home. The Polish government called the incident an act of aggression that threatens citizens' safety, adding its forces are fully ready to respond immediately. This occurred less than a week after Russian President Vladimir Putin visited China, showing unity with Chinese and North Korean leaders. Since then, Russia launched its largest air attack on Ukraine since the war began. United States Senator Dick Durbin responded overnight, saying that Vladimir Putin is testing our resolve to defend Poland and the Baltic countries.
And Durbin is a senator from the Democratic Party, and they try very hard to say everything that contradicts Trump's policies. That's the case now as well. Durbin attached this still unclear situation to the danger of the Baltic region, the Baltic countries, and Poland being seized.
All right, we're starting with breaking news from Europe. This morning, Poland announced that it shot down several Russian drones that entered its airspace during Moscow's latest attack on Ukraine. This is the first time NATO aircraft have engaged with potential threats from Russia in the airspace of allied countries. No casualties have been reported. And recently, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said that the organization will defend every inch of its territory. Speaking earlier in Warsaw, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk warned that his country is now closer than ever to open conflict since World War II. And he said that he has requested the application of NATO Article 4, which allows NATO members to raise issues for discussion within the alliance.
This is not yet Article 5 on collective defense, but Article 4 about discussing the possibilities of joint action.
To learn more about this, let's invite Professor Brian Taylor. He is the director of the Moynihan Institute of Global Affairs at Syracuse University. Thank you for joining us, Professor. For our viewers, could you please explain what this Russian drone attack over Poland means? What kind of escalation are we witnessing?
Well, the reported number of drones is about 24, and I think there are some signs that this was not just an accident. I saw a report that none of the drones were armed. They were all either decoys or reconnaissance drones. Russia hasn't made any comments yet. You know, they haven't taken responsibility for this, and they've kind of postponed the decision. First of all, I would say that Ukraine is being hit by hundreds of drones and missiles every night. So 20 seems like a small number, but of course, Poland is a member of NATO. The United States is a member of this alliance, and Poland is requesting consultations among the alliance members. Several other countries have sent planes to help shoot down some of the drones. This could be a potential escalation in the war, extending beyond Russia-Ukraine.
We all know and understand this. So what exactly is this Article 4 of the NATO agreement?
Of course. So there are two key articles. Article 4 concerns consultations if there is a threat to a country's security. Article 5 is more serious. It's about the fact that in the event of an armed attack on a NATO member, all other countries must come to its defense. We're not at that level, so we're not at war, just to reassure everyone. A call from Poland means that they take this quite seriously and are asking their allies to come to their defense. At a time when their territory has come under some attack and security threat.
And what does supporting Poland mean for NATO members? What options are being considered?
Well, we already saw last night that some aircraft came to defend Poland as well as Polish aircraft. But there are a number of options available, including patrolling Polish airspace. It is even possible to potentially consider patrolling the airspace over Western Ukraine to prevent this from happening again, and also to protect Ukraine from some missile and drone attacks. I don't know if NATO will be ready to take this step, but it seems to me that this looks like a deliberate attempt by Russia to test NATO's resolve. They're waiting to see NATO's response. So if there is no response from NATO, I think we can expect such tests from Russia to continue.
One of the reasons for the drone incursions could be to test how NATO will respond. And if there is no response, then like all bullies, Russia will do something more serious and watch again.
The aftermath video filmed in eastern Poland shows some of the drone damage in Incursion. The European Union condemned the event, and the Commission president commented,
"And only today we witnessed a reckless and unprecedented violation of Polish and European airspace by more than 10 Russian Shahed drones. Europe stands fully with Poland."
Besides the events in Poland, Ukraine faced heavy shelling from over 400 Russian drones and 20 missiles. Ryan.
All right, Trey, that's amazing. They actually attacked a NATO ally, so I don't know how long we'll be able to stay out of this. Thank you, Trey Yanks. This is,
The version that there was an attack, but there wasn't one. Drones without explosives and weapons are not an attack. Reconnaissance drones, yes. Drones to test reactions, yes. Drones to see what they'll be shot down with. All of that is possible.
Alarming development overnight. Poland says it shot down Russian drones that violated the country's airspace earlier today during an attack on Ukraine. This is the first time that Poland or any NATO member state has directly engaged Russian assets since Vladimir Putin launched the full-scale invasion in 2022. Polish military officials say the drones were targeting sites in Ukraine but repeatedly violated Polish airspace, which prompted a response. The incident occurred just hours after Poland announced it would temporarily close its border with Belarus starting tomorrow, as Belarus and Russia are conducting large joint military exercises. So, David Ro, it was the fear that this war would spread further into Eastern Europe beyond the borders of Ukraine. And last night it happened in Poland, prompting a response from NATO.
I believe Putin is testing both NATO and Trump. With 19 invasions, NATO has functioned as intended. What was interesting was that the Poles, noticed these incursions. There were Dutch fighter jets that joined the Polish fighter jets. There were German air defense systems that were on the ground, and they were armed and ready.
David Ignatius. One could argue that the situation in Ukraine is only getting worse. It continues. And now there's this incursion into Polish airspace.
So, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk described this drone attack as a large-scale provocation by Russia. That's exactly right. Russia is increasing pressure on the borders. There have been other drone flights before this night. The Poles mostly let them go, but this time they shot down several Russian drones and responded. As David Rose said, in coordination with NATO, this was considered an attack on a NATO state. So let's see what happens next. But it's obvious that Russia is expanding its borders not only in Ukraine, where it launches 800 to 900 drones a night plus ballistic missiles, but now it's spreading the war to other parts of Europe. Putin thinks he's on the rise, and someone needs to stop him in a more decisive way.
I disagree. It wasn't a NATO provocation. It was more of a test. But what kind of test? Well, let's figure it out.
In what? A moment while Ukrainians are dying, while Europe is under threat of a Russian invasion. They sit idly by and say, well, we'll just wait to see what someone else does. No, they are the first branch. They are the branch of Article 1. They have the power to stop the Russian villains. They have the power to protect Western civilization. They have the power to defend democracy and freedom. Not only in Ukraine, but also in the Baltic countries and throughout Eastern and Central Europe.
In my opinion, we are being pushed toward armed intervention in the conflict. That is, even by demanding military action against Russia from the United States Senate, we are being pushed toward World War III. That is, it's the exact opposite of Trump's policy, who is trying to stop all the wars happening on the planet. Now everyone who wants to or benefits from war will use this episode to produce more weapons and send American soldiers, let's say, into someone else's war on someone else's continent to interfere in the struggle between two split parts of the Soviet Union. If we, the United States, have decided to defend democracy, then you go send your son to Ukraine and give what you spend on drinks and clothes for helmets and body armor for those who are being bombed. We got involved, but what will happen if the United States doesn't intervene? Well, that's what all Ukrainian media keep repeating.
If the president doesn't want to act, the Senate must act. Otherwise, the blood of all these Ukrainians will be on their hands. And yes, the defeat of a country that strives to become a Western democracy that is reaching out to us for the freedom that Ronald Reagan and all the presidents before him fought for, from Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan, to give them freedom when we won the Cold War.
This will now be quoted as America's opinion. Just in case, here are the statistics. In 2021, more than 1 million viewers watched MSNBC daily. In 2022, it was 740,000, and this year, only 545,000 per day remain. Viewers are leaving them. Well, only the most programmed, brainwashed ones are left. So the MSNBC eye is like the eye of someone crying out in the wilderness. Except for the crazed liberalists, no one watches or listens to them. I really hope that the State Department and Trump will respond to what's happening carefully, not rashly.
This video is after Russia carried out drone strikes in Poland. So Russia launched drones into Poland, and all of this happened just a few days after President Trump met with the top official there from Poland. And we wanted to share this perspective with you. Breaking news, President Trump is now responding. All of this happened a week after President Trump met with the Polish president at the White House. Russia launched about 24 drones into the NATO country on Wednesday. This attack prompted NATO allies to respond militarily to this apparent Russian assault and brought Poland closer to open conflict for the first time since World War II. This move also prompted President Trump to post a very harsh message on social media. And I would like to share this message with you right now. He shared on his social media platform, Truth Social, about the violation of Polish airspace by Russia using drones. Here we go. So a very strong message from President Trump to Russia after this. And Senator Lindsey Graham also responded to President Trump's statement saying, I completely agree with President Trump's opinion. In response to Russia's insane violation of Polish airspace for several hours using multiple drones. Mr. President, Congress supports you. We are ready to pass legislation authorizing the introduction of devastating new sanctions and tariffs that can be applied at your discretion. Our goal is to give you the ability to deal with this growing threat. You are also right to insist that Europe follow your example in imposing tariffs against countries like China and India, which buy cheap Russian oil that fuels Putin's war machine. I hope Europe understands that Republicans and Democrats in Congress are working with President Trump on new ideas, such as tariffs, to put an end to this war. I hope you're watching too. That's why we wanted to share the latest developments after Russian drones were launched into Poland. Later, and these are some archival shots of that. Meanwhile, the Kremlin claims that there is no evidence that the drones were of Russian origin.
I didn't know that, but apparently Russia claimed that those weren't their drones and that the non-commissioned officer's widow flogged herself. Thanks to Gogol for explaining that to us. A high level of air defense readiness has been introduced in Poland. All airports have been temporarily closed, and aviation and alert systems have been activated. An emergency meeting of Poland's National Security Council has been convened. The discussion will focus on increasing NATO's presence on Poland's eastern border. The President of the European Commission and European Union leaders have expressed solidarity with Poland and stated that they are working on a course of action. Additional sanctions on Russia. So far, their sanctions have not stopped Russia. But Trump is demanding that Europe impose sanctions on India and slow down its exports to the European Union and Britain, in other words, to force it to give up Russian oil. NATO refused to consider this incident as an attack on the country. Thank God the members of the alliance, but several countries sent aircraft to Poland, also monitoring equipment for what is flying from the direction of Russia and Belarus. Major military sanctions are probably not going to be implemented at this stage. Moscow will publicly deny any intent and will call for dialogue to cool down hotheads. There was no deliberate intention or deliberate actions. In reality, the Kremlin will increase pressure through various provocations, drones, military exercises, and so on, to show the vulnerability of Europe's and NATO's borders. This is called a strategy, well, penetration, psychological escalation with the goal of demoralizing the enemy and splitting the alliance. The Kremlin will not enter into an open conflict, but will continue incidents in the Baltic regions. What's it called? Suwalki, what's the name? That very Suwalki corridor. Sorry, I always have trouble with names. I wouldn't expect a direct military escalation against Poland and the Baltics at this stage, but the number of incidents will increase and the geography will expand. As long as there is no economic or military threat to Russia, Putin will not stop the war, escalation, or provocations. Provocations may include drones, cyber attacks, information operations, disinformation, demonstrations at the borders, and military exercises. Russia will continue to create the appearance of being constructive, of dialogue, of a constructive position, while at the same time testing the West's responses and reactions to the weapons that Russia possesses. Russia will share all this information, of course, with China to process this data and to work out joint actions. If Europe follows in Trump's footsteps and imposes sanctions on India, and India in turn refuses Russian oil, right now it buys about 1.7 to 2 million barrels per day. That's a large amount. In my opinion, in terms of purchase volume, not in terms of money, but in terms of the amount bought, India is even ahead of China. China buys a bit more, but at a slightly better price, because it's delivered to them through pipelines, while here it has to be transported. So now, what's happening? Russian exports will decrease by about 10–15% if India leaves. The state budget will lose billions of dollars, and the oil will have to be sold urgently since there's nowhere to store it, which means at reduced prices. Meanwhile, the United States and Europe might also sanction new potential buyers. If India completely stops buying Russian oil, Moscow will face a severe economic blow, including a drop in gross domestic product. What does it mean? A drop in Russians' living standards. This will seriously affect social welfare. For Russians, will Russia agree to a peace settlement in Ukraine? For a temporary pause, probably yes, but for the Kremlin, the conflict in Ukraine is the key to maintaining the regime. Imperial ambitions are certainly present, but to a lesser extent, so to speak, than preserving their own skin and lives. And internal control, which is also very important for them. Even despite the worsening economic indicators, still, control will outweigh everything else. Even losing business with India won't make Putin capitulate. That is, he won't stop pursuing the goals he has set and has already stated more than once. He has made this clear several times over the past year. Only if there is a risk of social instability in Russia will the regime soften its stance. So, a serious economic blow will lead to a pause with Ukraine, possibly negotiations, and most likely a resumption of military actions. When the situation changes a little, it will swing back the other way. Russia's main demands were publicly stated in 2024-2025, we know them. This is the recognition of control over the seized regions, including the parts not yet captured, starting with full control over Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. Plus official recognition by the whole world that Crimea and these regions belong to Russia. Second, Ukraine's refusal to join NATO or other military blocs. Third, limiting Ukraine's army to a nominal size. Fourth, lifting Western sanctions. Fifth, no foreign bases, troops, weapons, or anything like that on Ukrainian territory. That's why the drone incursion into Polish territory is of a reconnaissance nature, to scout out the defenses, to observe the reaction to. Poland is prepared to monitor not only Europe's verbal response, but also gather intelligence, what NATO, led by the United States, will do and what consequences for Russia will follow. Now, in fact, everything depends on the West's response. I'm sure that Russia has a plan for provocations that they will carry out in the future, but their further actions, the development of these actions, will depend on the actions of those whom they are provoking. And another thought comes to mind before the covenant. And if neither the leadership of Ukraine nor the leadership of Russia wants a peace that would simply freeze the captured territories, then Ukraine should be given as many weapons as possible to destroy as many Russians as possible. Of course, this will prolong the war, but if no one is planning to end it anyway. So, as we say, the next best option, the next best way is to let the Ukrainians destroy many more Russians, both on the territory of Ukraine and beyond, that is, on the territory of Russia itself. Maybe, by the way, also on the territory of Belarus, since something is flying from there. This will distract Russia from provocations and may increase the irritation and resistance of Russians to the continuation of the war. So as of today, with all this news, with everything that's happening, I don't see probably any other way except to give Ukraine more weapons, so that they can simply inflict as much damage as possible on Russian troops inside Ukraine and on Russian infrastructure and everything else, and outside Ukraine. If you have any thoughts on this, I'd be happy to read them because it's interesting. This is the first time I'm expressing such ideas, if you've noticed. Because at some point you realize that some other ways just don't work. Maybe Trump has some other ideas, but so far I haven't seen any sign of those ideas. And as I already said, even if we put pressure on India, I still don't have the feeling that as a result of India leaving, that they would stop buying Russian oil. Something significant will occur in the Ukrainian war after that. But maybe first with India, then, if it works out and everything goes smoothly, we'll start cutting off other countries from our markets and European ones in the same way, so that everyone knows. Either you buy Russian oil or you trade with Europe, Japan, England, the United States of America, Canada, and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really interested in what you think about this, because I'm still considering it. Maybe next time I'll say, I used to think this way, but now I've got some new ideas. So until next time, I'll read what you write to me and I'll try to respond to it.